Welcome into the Energy Tech Podcast, where today we're recording episode 3 of our Control Room Management mini-series, as Mike and Daniel will be discussing shift change and handover process. Guys, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jeff, thanks for having us. I am your co-host, Mike Flores, with the Energy Tech Podcast, right here in Canonsburg, Pennsylvania, with, of course, our guest, the expert in regulatory compliance with OpSite Energy, Mr. Daniel Nieto. Daniel, thanks for being here with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, this is going to be a good episode. I think right now what we're going to cover is something that to me is the linchpin of control room management, and that is shift handover. We're going to talk a little bit about that, the shift change handover, the process, getting some operational continuity and safety. Daniel, I think this is going to be really good for us. So let's kick this thing off, man. What can we expect from the episode?
Yeah, and so this episode overview is basically going to cover, what we're looking for from, for a shift change and what the kind of the 1168, guidance for control room management, kind of practice, industry practice. It kind of hits on the fundamentals of just regulatory critical information being exchanged, and making sure that we, touch base from a controller standpoint of, none of that kind of being lost out there.
Yeah, Daniel, so I think you're right. A lot of it doesn't get lost. You want to make sure you have some continuity, right? You want to add to the pipeline safety. I think, in terms of shift change, having a good shift change benefits you even if you're not regulated. It really adds value to the control room if you can implement a really good shift change between operators. So Let's go through that, and let's start kind of with the foundation of where this comes from. This regulatory foundation, what you're trying to do. I think if you're going to do this, you are trying to implement some continuity between shifts or hitches. Sometimes it's, hey, I was on shift for 4 days or not 7 days, but 4 days, or I ran my hitch period. And now I need to make sure I communicate some continuity, some safety during the transfer of that responsibility. Daniel, you've been through a lot of audits. Is this a big deal?
Yes. So again, one of the big things you're going to cover here is just making sure, again, it's the human factor element and
Right.
making sure that things are not getting lost as you're leaving the shift or someone coming on, right? So we spoke to that, making sure that that information is being transferred. It's not getting lost or just kind of left out there. So again, some of the API recommended practices, 1168 for the control room management, you can follow that kind of, best practice and making sure that you're hitting, some of these items here to reduce any type of, unplanned events or any information on pipeline operations, make sure that's getting across.
Well, let's kind of go through that. So you've got, your console coverage and shift overlap, right? What do auditors expect? You've kind of outlined some of this, in the probably the slide before this one. You've got one that kind of talks about what auditors actually expect. What it is that they're really looking for in the formal process of the handoff of the shift change. And Daniel, walk us through that for a little bit, and also the shift change triggers, any sort of overlap, and any accountability.
Yeah, so what the auditors are looking for here is making sure that in between, during the shift, making sure that the ongoing controller or incoming controller have procedures in place on for that system, and making sure that, your shift change procedure shows the accountability and that transfer, right? And making sure that there's no one interrupting that during that, during that shift change briefing.
Right.
You want to make sure that during that process, you're kind of putting everything on hold. If something comes up, you want to pause your shift change, take care of that action if it needs to be taken care of, and then going back to that coverage and making sure that, that overlap when someone's coming in on shift, that they have that, kind of debriefing, right? You want to make sure that you're getting all that information across.
Yeah. So, Daniel, I want to point out something, and that is there's a trigger when you're in a shift change. It's not just the end of my shift. It could be any time a controller completes a shift. Let's say, hey, you had to undergo a deviation of some kind, or, that controller could not complete, let's say, a 12-hour shift in a day, right? In that case, if you have to do that, you will have to do your actual completion of a shift change, right?
Yeah, it could be several things, right? It could be, and I know we'll speak about it here. Someone has to, say you have a short break, that could be one of them, or an extended break, some type of training, or some type of, a random drug test,
right?
And you have to do a shift change. Those things will happen, and you need to have a process of how that's going to be followed, right? And that's what PHMSA is looking at, and making sure that when they come in, you can speak to those things.
Right. So now that you've done that, you've got a trigger. A lot of times you want to have some overlap, right? So you mentioned this earlier, but really hone in on that. Is that, hey, you got a request, you want to actually discuss, what is it you're trying to capture in that discussion?
So, as far as the overlap, again, you're relieving that controller, right? So you're coming on shift. You want to allow in your CRM, in your procedure, there should state where you have some type of overlap, so that way that transfer of information can happen.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that there's plenty of time there for you to communicate to the incoming controller what's going on within, the system, just, as far as making sure that, again, nothing's being dropped. They should be able to follow that procedure. It should take place at the console, right?
Right.
And you should make sure that, everything is covered, and that should be outlined within, your CRM or your shift change procedure, identified what the controllers are reviewing and how that's being reviewed.
Having said that, Daniel, what is the auditor looking for in terms of accountability documentation, aside from a date? They're looking for a date, a time. They're looking for, what in your experience, what are some of the things maybe they're looking at when they're pulling in a shift change? A lot of times these are handwritten or they're digital, one or the other. What is it that they're looking for? I mean, you want the accountability for time and I signed it. I did this. What are some of the takeaways from that sheet or that shift change?
So, again, a lot of it is based off of how your procedure is written, right? So it'll identify, again, PHMSA is going to come in and look at what you have written in your plan and in your procedure on when that transfer is happening, right? They're going to want to see, okay, do you allot time, one, what's being covered? So that's within your procedure on what's being covered. And again, you have the recommended practice that you can go by. It identifies things that are listed for you to speak to within your operations. And they want to make sure that, again, all these are being covered. So what they're looking at is the time, and they're looking at the material and that information that's being reviewed.
Yeah, so in the information, you've got the next slide where you kind of talk about some of those things. There's like abnormal operating conditions, a maintenance status, some of the alarm reviews. You've got daily operational, some equipment stuff. I guess what I'm asking mainly is, okay, you've got the shift change form, you've got the accountability documents. It sounds like these might be some top 5 areas that you really want to hone in on your shift change form.
Yeah, so you're going to want to look at any unresolved events, right? You want to look at procedural changes. So you want to make sure you're covering those, any type of system or equipment that may be out of service, communication issues, right? And we can do a deeper dive on this, but also your alarm status, making sure those are being reviewed.
Right.
And again, there could be some additional items on here as far as like looking at your nominations or, your deliveries and things like that. So that's where, again, it's going to go down to that operator, what your CRM is saying, what your procedures have identified, because, there could be a little more detailed information there within your plan.
Yeah. So now that, you've targeted some of the items that need to be recorded, what about when sometimes they'll use the term an unattended console. When does that apply?
So an unattended console it could be anywhere from, you taking some type of break.
Yeah.
You can be, stretching your legs, getting some coffee, using the restroom.
Yeah.
So the unattended console it's speaking to some of those items and making sure that, again, that's a temporary, kind of leave, you're
Right.
stepping away from, right? So the unattended console, that's what it's kind of referencing there.
Okay, so that's unattended. What about if something's unpredictable, meaning, hey, an outgoing controller has to transfer to someone that's fit for duty for whatever reason? Like me, I'm feeling under the weather. That might contribute to my overall fatigue, right?
Yeah. So that's exactly it too. So your procedures need to identify and be able to to speak to unplanned changes with the controller getting sick or not being able to come into work or having an emergency and needing to leave. Right. There's been plenty of times where you go into an audit and you have all these things covered, right? And one of the things that's kind of always mentioned is what happens if someone just kind of, passes away
Right.
during the shift, and how is that handled, right? So you need to even account for those situations or winning the lottery, right? And not showing up for work or just kind of walking out. So you need to be able to kind of somehow integrate that within your procedures on how you would approach that and kind of manage those events if they were to occur.
Yeah, I think one of the other things too that's you cover here is the alternative actions, of course, and the fit for duty actions you're talking about. But there's also the fact that you really don't want to do that shift handover until all of your commands are complete. So in other words, I'm sitting at the desk and say, well, hold on, let me shut this valve. Let me close this valve real quick, and then go ahead and take over. Like, you want to wait until that's completely you're past the in-travel period. You've truly completed maybe a shutdown or a pinch or whatever you're doing, right?
Right. So if you're on a shift, and again, that's all speaking to earlier as far as you're having that shift change briefing.
Yeah.
Right. An action comes in, you need to stop that shift change. That needs to be identified within your procedure to stop and make sure to take care of those items. And that way, again, whether it's commands being sent or action that's being taken care, by a controller is kind of fully fleshed out.
Yeah.
You want to make sure that everything is done, taken care of, and as you're handing that over. And the biggest part of that is stopping that information of transfer, right?
Got it.
Kind of put that on hold, take care of these items.
Right.
And that's the allotted time there. You're trying to allow that time, that way they're not rushing through it.
Right.
You're able to hit what's in your procedure based off the recommended practice. You identify what's within your procedure and how you're going to, what you're going to be covering.
Right.
And making sure that you allow that time.
Got it. So let's revisit some of these so we're on the same page here. You're listening or watching. Some of the key requirements. Let's run through some of these real quick. Daniel, I'm going to ask you after we go through some of these. What is the most? I'd say you probably have egregious cases in the past that you've worked with an auditor, or perhaps maybe there's something that sticks out. So let's run through some of these, and then I want to get your feedback a little bit. So really, when we're doing a compliance checklist for shift change, we want that formal handover procedure to be defined. We want, to have some consistent use. We want console coverage maintained at all times during that transfer, right? The other thing is you want to have some handover checklist that includes your AOCs, your abnormal operating conditions, your typical operations, any sort of maintenance equipment issues you want to pass on, any alternatives for unplanned transfer or temporary absence need to be indicated in there. If I took a break, if I had an extended period of leave from the desk for whatever reason, you need to make sure that any commands are verified or fulfilled before you can even, or you got to halt that change or not undergo your shift change if in fact you have a command or you have some unfulfilled actions that are happening on the desk, right? You got to have that overlap time. That's something that's important. You have to have that clear accountability with date and time and transfer documentation. Any sort of alarm status that's reviewed, that's covered to the incoming shift, right? Anything that's active, inhibited, anything that was put, sometimes you put that into a different mode or you override, or someone's conducting work. So it sounds like those are things you want to do. You want to have your fit for duty requirement and then retain the record of what you're doing. It needs to be available for audit, right? Yeah. Having said some of these things, what do you think is, in your experience, maybe one or two of the glaring ones that you've seen over and over in an audit?
A lot of it is, making sure that, documentation is represented correctly.
Yeah.
Right. So if you had an event that occurred on your shift and you maybe identified someone incorrectly, right, they're looking for those records, right? So you may have an abnormal operations that occurred on your shift.
Yeah.
It's not on your shift change.
Got it.
Or say you identified someone on an abnormal operations and it's the wrong individual, right?
Yeah.
Those things need to be corrected, reviewed, make sure that they're identified, because now you're really having to make that modification, or now you're looking for something that's, really not, that's not there and it's not being transferred correctly. For that next controller that's coming on board is, they're contacting someone else on something that, he has no, idea of what, is actually going on for that location.
Yeah, or what has transpired maybe in the past.
Exactly. And so we've seen a lot of those things, at least I have, where, controllers may have misidentified the personnel at the field level or didn't account for an abnormal or communicate that across to that there's something still pending, right? Because, again, doesn't mean that the controller has to stay there throughout the entire event, but you want to make sure that you're communicating across so that way the incoming controller knows what's going on, right? And it's been documented on his shift change, and it's there for him to review and update as, we find out more information on that.
Yeah, so now if you're a compliance manager or a control room supervisor, here are your actionable takeaways is what I'm hearing, through this episode is you want to formalize that transfer log. That's going to be a big deal. It's the linchpin of what you're doing. Second is you want to make sure that you drill for the unscheduled. That just means, that you've covered it in training. Everyone understands what the procedure is. You have your specific cover scenario, for shift. You've anticipated any unanticipated or delay, so you want to really train for these unscheduled items. And then finally, it sounds like you really want to check your list. Just make sure that the items we gave you, you can actually look into those and then translate back to APRP 1168 for even more guidance and FAQ.
Yes. So you can definitely look at those for your operations and identify, what fits for you as the operator. And again, a lot of these audits, they're going to be looking directly at those procedures.
Yeah.
And they're going to want to see that documentation and ensuring that that's being covered. And again, a checkbox that states that you've done something is not what they want to see. You know, they want to see that information, how it's communicated. And again, it's a record, right? A communication
Right.
with field personnel. Again, you just want to make sure that you have all that information, especially if it's an unresolved abnormal operations. And you really need to check your procedure because they will ask you where in your procedure does it identify the transfer,
Right.
right? What is that, a SCADA login? Is it, you know, what is that?
Trigger.
Yes. What is that trigger?
Yeah.
Because they will be looking at the timestamps of, you know, that documentation,
Okay.
you know, from, you logged out this time and logging back in. It's about making sure that your information is ready for any type of audit, and you know what you're pulling and how to present that information.
Oh man, Daniel, that's good to know. You know, so you're really, what you're doing is just really, the key takeaway here is really getting and nailing down your shift handover, right? And having that for continuous safety, you know, getting that formalized process. It's not nonchalant when you're doing a shift change. That's a big deal. And, you know, I think in the next episode, we're going to get a little bit more technical, but I think we've got some takeaways here that people can follow on this episode. And if they want, you can go back and see those key points for shift handover. One of the things I want to point out is we'll at least make these available, and you can like and subscribe. And if you ask questions, we can address them to the episode and target those and talk about them. So keep that in mind. You know, Daniel, I appreciate you. We're going to close this one out. And don't forget, on the next episode, we're going to target the Section C of the federal rule on providing adequate information. That will come up next. So don't forget to listen in. This is just a third episode of many to come. We want to give you some key takeaways you can use. And don't forget, you can lean on the same expertise. Since Daniel is here, we can address those questions. You bring them up, post them. We'll be happy to address them. And with that, I'm your co-host as part of the mini-series, Mike Flores with the Energy Tech Podcast, joined with Daniel Nieto, our VP of Compliance. Daniel, glad you're here, man, and lending that expertise.
Okay. Thanks, Mike.
Appreciate it. It was good.